INFJs often carry a quiet kind of exhaustion, one that doesn't always show up on their face, but hums constantly beneath the surface. This scattered feeling they often wrestle with isn't laziness, and it's not indecision. It's the byproduct of living with a mind and heart that rarely rest. There's so much going on inside the INFJ that the outside world sometimes becomes a blur, and it's hard for them to explain why they feel like they're unraveling, even when everything looks fine. One of the main reasons INFJs feel scattered is because their inner world is always active. Their intuition, the dominant function in their personality, is like an engine that never switches off. It's constantly analyzing, connecting dots, processing subtle patterns, imagining outcomes, and questioning motives. They walk through the world not just seeing what's in front of them, but feeling what's behind it. Every glance, every shift in energy, every word left unsaid, it all gets stored, cataloged, and layered deep within their consciousness. The mind of an INFJ is like a browser with 50 tabs open, and 10 of them are playing music they can't find. This overwhelming internal activity makes it hard for INFJs to stay present. While others might be focusing on a task or enjoying a moment, the INFJ mind is already jumping 5 steps ahead, worrying about what's coming, reflecting on what just happened, and wondering if they handled the situation with enough care. They can be washing dishes while replaying an awkward conversation from 2 years ago, imagining how they'll react if they run into that person again, while simultaneously worrying if they're living up to their potential in life. It's exhausting. To unlock the power of your INFJ personality, check out our INFJ Mastery course and INFJ ebook. The links are in the description of this video. Then there's the emotional weight they carry. INFJs absorb emotions like a sponge, often without realizing it. If someone in the room is angry, even subtly, the INFJ feels it in their body. If a friend is hurting but pretending they're okay, the INFJ senses the disconnect. This emotional hypersensitivity is a gift. They can comfort, heal, and understand others on a deep level, but it's also a massive drain on their system. By the end of the day, they've not only dealt with their own feelings, but with everyone else's too. This leaves them scattered, disoriented, and sometimes unable to tell which feelings even belong to them anymore. Their desire for harmony also plays a role. INFJs often find themselves torn between conflicting roles: being a good friend, showing up for family, pursuing their creative dreams, staying productive, being emotionally available, maintaining healthy habits, and doing what's expected of them socially. All of these things are important to them, but trying to juggle them all at once makes them feel like they're failing at everything. They want to give their best to everything they care about, but life doesn't give enough space for that kind of depth in every direction. And because INFJs naturally hold themselves to high standards, the sense of being scattered quickly turns into a spiral of guilt and self-criticism. Their idealism, though beautiful, can also make them feel scattered. INFJs often envision how life should be, how relationships should feel, how their work should matter, how their days should unfold with meaning and purpose. When reality doesn't align with those visions, it creates inner tension. They try to bridge the gap between their vision and their reality, and in the process, spread themselves thin, chasing ideals in a world that often rewards shortcuts and surface-level living. It's not that they can't adapt, it's that they don't want to give up their vision. And constantly carrying that vision in a world that doesn't reflect it can fracture their sense of balance. Another source of feeling scattered is how INFJs process decisions. They don't just ask, "What do I want?" They ask, "What does this mean for the future? How will this affect others? What are the emotional consequences? Will I regret this 10 years from now?" Every decision, no matter how small, becomes a deep dive into a pool of possible outcomes. Even choosing what to prioritize in a day can become overwhelming, because each choice feels tied to a greater emotional and existential consequence. So they hesitate, overthink, start things and leave them unfinished. Not because they're flaky, but because their mind is a constant negotiation between heart, logic, intuition, and empathy. And let's not forget how deeply INFJs crave solitude, and how guilty they feel for needing it. They may commit to plans, engage in conversations, offer emotional support, and then suddenly hit a wall where they feel scattered, raw, and overstimulated. At that point, they don't just need a nap or a break. They need deep withdrawal, a full system shutdown. And if they don't get it, if they keep pushing through social demands or emotional expectations, they end up scattered in a way that feels existential. They lose their center. Their thoughts become foggy. Their creativity dries up. They become emotionally numb or overly reactive, and they can't explain why. INFJs also struggle with saying no, not because they're pushovers, but because they care. They care about how their words affect others. They care about being misunderstood. They care about showing up when people need them. But the result is often an overcommitment of time, energy, and emotion, until suddenly they're stretched so thin that everything feels chaotic. They may look composed on the outside, but inside, they're a tangled web of unfinished ideas, neglected needs, emotional fatigue, and frustration with themselves for once again taking on too much. And when INFJs finally sit down to rest, their mind often won't let them. Even in stillness, the inner dialogue continues. Self-reflection, daydreams, what-ifs, philosophical musings. They live in a constant tug-of-war between their vision and their reality, their empathy and their boundaries, their solitude and their social obligations. This internal conflict doesn't make them broken. It makes them deep. But that depth can sometimes fragment into 1,000 pieces, leaving them feeling like they're floating without an anchor. What INFJs need, more than anything, is space. Not just physical space, but mental and emotional spaciousness, the kind that allows them to come back to themselves without pressure or noise. They need time to untangle their thoughts, to feel their feelings without absorbing someone else's, to step away from the world's chaos and remember their center. Because underneath all that scattered energy is something constant, a profound sense of purpose, a well of empathy, and a deep desire to live meaningfully. INFJs aren't lost, they're layered. And sometimes, feeling scattered is just their soul's way of asking them to pause and come home. What makes the INFJ feel scattered isn't always external chaos. It's often the quiet storm within. To the outside world, they might look calm, thoughtful, even serene. But inside, their mind is constantly worrying, shifting between thoughts, emotions, ideas, memories, dreams, and responsibilities. It's not dramatic. It's not loud, but it's constant, like soft background static that never fully turns off. They have this deeply ingrained habit of mentally multitasking. While talking to someone, they're also evaluating the subtext of the conversation, wondering about the emotional state of the other person, checking their own tone, reflecting on how this interaction fits into the broader arc of the relationship, and analyzing if they were truly being present or just performing. Even in silence, their thoughts are bouncing between processing the past, predicting the future, and questioning the present. And because they're not usually verbal processors, a lot of this happens beneath the surface, swirling and building, without any clean release. This is where the scattered feeling begins, when the inner world becomes so full that the outer world starts to feel disconnected. They'll forget things, not because they're careless, but because their mind is busy running simulations and soul-level check-ins. They might have a long to-do list, but feel frozen, not knowing where to begin, because everything feels equally important and equally exhausting. It's not uncommon for an INFJ to start 10 things in one day and finish none, not out of laziness, but because their emotional and mental energy is being pulled in so many different directions. Much of this scatteredness also comes from a deep-seated need to make meaning out of everything. INFJs rarely just experience something. They have to interpret it, feel through it, and understand how it fits into the greater pattern of their life. If something painful happens, they'll dig into it, not to wallow, but to extract the lesson. They're constantly processing life at a symbolic level. While this is one of their greatest gifts, it can also be incredibly disorienting, because not everything has a neat meaning right away. Some things just hurt. Some things just happen. And the INFJ, in trying to spiritualize or decode every detail, can end up stuck in a loop of overthinking, trying to solve a puzzle that wasn't meant to be solved today. To unlock the power of your INFJ personality, check out our INFJ Mastery course and INFJ ebook. The links are in the description of this video. INFJs are also extremely attuned to what's missing. It's part of why they make such great advisors, visionaries, and friends. They can see the invisible thread, sense the undercurrent, notice what hasn't been said. But that same ability can make them feel perpetually off balance. In a world that moves fast and schemes the surface, their depth often goes unacknowledged. They can feel lonely even in a crowd, disconnected even when surrounded by loved ones. It's not because those people don't care. It's because the INFJ often feels things that others don't even notice. And when no one else picks up on those subtleties, they start to wonder if they're just imagining things. This self-doubt adds another layer of scatteredness, questioning their own perceptions, wondering if they're too much, too sensitive, too in their head. Another factor is the weight of their unlived potential. INFJs are long-term thinkers. They often feel called toward a greater purpose, something bigger than themselves. But the path to that purpose is rarely straightforward. In the meantime, they may feel stuck in jobs that don't align with their values, relationships that only scratch the surface, or environments that feel spiritually dry. And because they know they're meant for more, feel it deep in their bones, that sense of inner misalignment creates constant low-grade tension. They're scattered not just because they're overwhelmed, but because they feel out of sync with the life they know they're meant to be living. INFJs are also quietly exhausted by contradiction. They are paradoxes by nature, deeply idealistic, but painfully aware of reality, empathetic to a fault, but fiercely protective of their energy, private and internal, but longing to be truly seen. They want connection, but dread the energy it requires. They want to speak up, but worry they'll be misunderstood. Living in this tension every day, balancing light and shadow, soul and survival, intuition and logic. It's no wonder they sometimes feel like they're unraveling, even when nothing is visibly wrong. Another major reason INFJs feel scattered is because they rarely take up space for themselves. Even when they withdraw, it's usually to recharge so they can re-engage with others, so they can give more, help more, listen more. They are so accustomed to reading everyone else's needs that they often lose track of their own. Their energy gets dispersed, fragmented, offered in tiny pieces to everyone around them until they realize they've been running on empty for weeks. When INFJs begin to feel scattered, it's not a sign that they're failing. It's a signal, a sacred whisper from their soul, saying, "Come back to center." It means it's time to retreat, not to run away, but to realign, to clear the noise, to pour their attention back inward. The beauty of the INFJ is that they can find their way back. Their depth, their intuition, their self-awareness, it all leads them home eventually. But until they take that space, until they release the pressure to solve everything and be everything, the scattered feeling will linger like static. Not because they're broken, but because they're full. Because they feel too much, love too hard, think too deeply, and the world rarely gives them the time to let it all settle. So when the INFJ feels scattered, what they really need is not more productivity, or more structure, or more advice. They need to exhale, to unplug from everything that isn't truth, and to remember that even when they feel pulled in 1,000 directions, there's always one quiet place inside that has never wavered. Their core, their intuition, that deep knowing that they were never meant to be everything to everyone, just everything to themselves. What many people don't realize is that the INFJ's scattered feeling is less about chaos in their environment and more about the subtle ways they slowly disconnect from themselves. And it's not dramatic. It's not explosive. It's like trying to walk through fog that keeps getting thicker without even knowing when the fog started rolling in. One moment they're centered, clear, purposeful, and the next they're drowning in layers of thought, emotion, and pressure that don't feel like there's any more. Another reason INFJs feel scattered is because they are often functioning in an environment that doesn't reflect their internal blueprint. They may have jobs that don't nurture their values. They may be surrounded by people who don't speak their emotional language. They might live in a fast-paced, outcome-driven culture when what they really crave is depth, presence, and intentional living. And they adapt, they always do. But deep down, there's a yearning for a slower, more meaningful rhythm, a life that honors nuance, one that makes room for the sacred and the ordinary. When this longing goes unaddressed, INFJs begin to float in their own lives, untethered, not because they're lost, but because nothing around them feels like home. They're also masters at appearing okay while emotionally spiraling. They've learned how to smile when they're unraveling, to show up while silently breaking. It's a defense mechanism, but also a result of their empathy. They don't want to burden others. They know how heavy their energy can feel when they're emotionally raw. So they put on the calm face, the understanding voice, and they carry the chaos quietly. This self-containment eventually splinters. And that's when the scatteredness creeps in, when the pressure of being the strong one turns into a silent scream for relief. INFJs also lose themselves in the emotions of others, not just through compassion, but through full-on emotional merging. If someone close to them is suffering, they absorb it. If someone needs support, they internalize that need. It's almost instinctual. But over time, this energetic entanglement becomes suffocating. They carry so much that isn't theirs that they start to lose sight of what is. Their thoughts, their dreams, their feelings become indistinguishable from the weight they've picked up from others. That kind of spiritual crowding leaves them scattered, confused, and longing to just be alone. Not for escape, but to finally hear their own voice again. INFJs also struggle with perfectionism in disguise. They may not always appear obsessive or rigid, but they hold themselves to invisible standards that are incredibly high. They want to get it right, whether it's in how they love, how they work, or how they show up for others. They believe in integrity, in being thoughtful, in honoring what's real. But this deep desire to live rightly can turn against them. They begin overthinking every decision, doubting every step, wondering if they've disappointed someone, or if they betrayed some unspoken part of themselves. The more they question, the more fragmented they feel. And suddenly, they're emotionally paralyzed, torn between being true to their ideal and surviving in a world that often doesn't reward that kind of sensitivity. And perhaps the most painful source of scatteredness is when an INFJ knows something needs to change, but doesn't yet have the clarity or courage to act. They feel the shift coming. They sense that a chapter is closing, that a boundary needs to be drawn, that a truth needs to be spoken. But they also feel the consequences, the emotional aftermath, the loss. INFJs don't take change lightly, especially when it affects others. So they wait, they linger, they analyze, they distract themselves. And in that liminal space between knowing and acting, their soul begins to fray. Because the longer they delay alignment, the more scattered they become. What they need, more than solutions or schedules, is soul space. Time to slow down, to unplug, to ask themselves the questions they've been avoiding. Questions like, what part of me have I been ignoring? What relationship no longer aligns with who I am? What emotions have I silenced to keep the peace? What truth have I been too afraid to say out loud? INFJs don't find their clarity by doing more. They find it by feeling more. But in a world that often tells them to toughen up, speed up, or lighten up, that emotional processing gets buried. That's when the scatteredness becomes unbearable. But here's the grace in it all. INFJs always find their way back. Even in the middle of emotional fragmentation, they carry a compass, a quiet, knowing voice that leads them back to a place of wholeness. To unlock the power of your INFJ personality, check out our INFJ Mastery course and INFJ ebook. The links are in the description of this video.